Today is Thursday, January 9th, 2025. This is a quick start from CBN News. I'm Dan Andros. California wildfires ravaged the Los Angeles area. We'll have that top story and more on today's podcast, where we bring you news from a Christian perspective. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a rating. Please do both of those things. We'd greatly appreciate it. Our email address, if you'd like to reach out to us, quickstartpodcast@cbn.org. And joining me now to get through the news of the Cray, CBN's Trey Goins-Phillips. A lot to get to today, as always, Trey. On the focus story, we're taking a look at a new warning from the Surgeon General.
Yeah, so alcohol consumption has been linked to a crazy number of diseases that I was kind of surprised by. So we'll get into some of the details there.
All right, looking forward to that. And then on the main thing, Britain's assisted dying bill, a very dangerous precedent. Dale Hurd has more on that coming up. Make sure you subscribe to all of our CBN News podcasts, DC Debrief with John Stolnis, Newsmakers with Billy. You can get those in the show notes, the links, the description below in this podcast episode. You can find all those links there, as well as our 4-part series, Jesus and the Prophecies of Christmas. You don't want to miss all of those. All right, we are going to head to the news now in 90 seconds. 3 wildfires are burning across Los Angeles County, including Pacific Palisades, Silmar, and near Pasadena, with zero containment. As of yesterday morning, 30,000 residents are under evacuation orders. More than 200,000 are without power as Santa Ana winds drive the fires. California Governor Gavin Newsom declared a state of emergency, and officials warn the worst is yet to come as flames consume homes. 2 arrests have been made for looting evacuated homes, prompting law enforcement to issue strong warnings. And the Palisades fire has grown nearly 3,000 acres, destroying homes and more. In Eaton, the wildfire has surged from 2,200 acres to 10,600. It did that within just hours. And so far, at least 2 fatalities reported statewide as firefighters continue to battle these blazes. President-elect Trump responded blaming California Governor Gavin Newsom for the fires, accusing him of prioritizing environmental policies over fire prevention. Those are just some of today's top headlines. You can check out those stories and more at cbnnews.com. And man, this is crazy that these fires they seem to regularly happen in California. And obviously you can't prevent every single fire from happening, but President-elect Trump has been talking about, he actually campaigned. There's clips of that going around where he was saying things he would do to help prevent these, that he'd talk to leaders in Austria who have very similar environments, similar makeup, similar trees, and they're able to keep the ground there moist, and they don't have these wildfire problems. So obviously it's a unique part of the world. You can never do a complete A to A comparison there with different parts of the world. But nevertheless, you do have to question, okay, what's going on here? Can more be done to stop these fires?
Yeah, for sure. It does seem like they're happening at a disproportionate degree or rate, but again, it's such a complicated thing, and I know that they have such little rainfall for periods of time. At least that seems to be the new trend. I'd be curious to go back. I haven't. I don't know if you have, Dan, and looked at like rainfall over like large periods of time. Like, do they get much less rain than they used to get? I don't know, but I think nobody, though, setting all of those things aside, I don't think there's anybody really, Democrat or Republican, who hasn't called into question the leadership in the state of California. I don't think that they've necessarily done a good job of handling most things, and I think this certainly falls into that category.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Gavin Newsom has been criticized on a lot of fronts. I mean, there's massive problems happening right now with crime, with homelessness, with drug abuse. I think skyrocketing prices on things. So a lot of problems in California. And look, if you look at the electoral map, a lot of people switched. And, I don't think it's a given. You can't just say forever California is going to be Democrat. And you look at the map and, of course, Los Angeles and the bigger cities tend to go Democrat. But if things get bad enough, at some point, people might just start saying, okay, well, maybe, definition of insanity is trying the same thing over and over again. Maybe we try something different. So we'll see how that goes in California. But in the meantime, praying for the people of California. Operation Blessing is looking at different ways to help. If you'd like to help Operation Blessing, just go to ob.org. Always great to give to them, even in the general fund, because we're responding to so many tragedies and so many natural disasters through Operation Blessing. So it's always, a fantastic organization, always bringing not just the physical needs, but the gospel as well. So a lot of people in California need the gospel. Let's be honest there. So you can check out ob.org for that. All right, we are going to head to the focus story now. And as we mentioned there at the top of the podcast, the Surgeon General released a new advisory about alcohol. What did it say?
Yeah, so January for a lot of people who do drink is like dry January, right? They're supposed to start, you don't drink. So Dr. Vivek Murthy, he issued a guidance when a lot of people are deciding, well, at least for this month, I'm not going to drink. But given the guidance, maybe some people will think a little bit more about whether they decide to drink again and how much they decide to drink. So new findings that were issued in a guidance, like I said, just released several days ago, is linking alcohol to the chances of contracting at least seven different types of cancer: throat, liver, esophageal, mouth, larynx, colon, and rectal cancers are all now linked to alcohol consumption. Now, of course, that means all of that is kind of determined by how much alcohol are you drinking. If you're drinking, very little alcohol in a month's time, then you're probably not at risk of contracting something like this. But if you're somebody who's drinking, one or two drinks a day, at that point, I would say you probably have a little bit of an issue on your hands potentially with drinking, but also that's when the chances of potentially developing these types of diseases ticks significantly up.
And how many deaths have been tied to alcohol?
So 2019 is the newest data that at least the Surgeon General released that was the most comprehensive. And in that year alone, an estimated 96,730 deaths were tied in some way to alcohol consumption. And that breaks down to 42,400 men and 54,330 in women. And that is a whole host of different things that fall under the category of alcohol consumption, right? It doesn't mean that it was necessarily a disease. Some of these were accidents that caused fatalities, et cetera. So it's a big umbrella number, but those are the statistics from 2019.
What data do we have on drinking among Christians? Obviously, this is a topic of debate. What data do we have on that?
Yeah, one thing too I want to mention regarding different types of cancer. Now, the Surgeon General's report went into detail about, I think it was a total of 4 different ways that one can develop cancer potentially by as a result of alcohol consumption. But prior to this data, we already knew that alcohol consumption significantly contributed to, in women especially, the likelihood of contracting breast cancer because it can increase your hormone levels. So that one was already known. So of all of the cancers, breast cancer we were already aware of it. And then this I've just found interesting, that carcinogens, which is cancer-causing agents from other things like tobacco or even in some of the foods that we eat, they actually dissolve into alcohol, which then that alcohol gets into your bloodstream easier than most fluids. So that's one unique way, I think, that you could be taking in cancer-causing carcinogens without really realizing it. Now, as far as research as it pertains to Christians, data published in 2017 by the Barna Group found that while Christians as a whole are less likely than their secular peers to drink alcohol, the majority of practicing Christians, about 60%, admitted that they do drink on occasion. However, less than half of evangelicals, 46%, said that they drink alcoholic beverages at all. So obviously Christians, this data is less applicable to Christians overall, but still more than half of Christians do drink alcohol. So it's something to consider.
Yeah, for sure. And, it's interesting because Christians do debate this, even though I think in scripture it's pretty clear that
Sure.
drinking is permissible, right? But not drunkenness. Like there's a difference there. But it's a tough line to walk, right, Trey? Like the issue with getting drunk or getting buzzed is that you don't really know what's happening. It's not like you've got a meter in front of you saying, well, you're fine, you're fine, you're fine, you're buzzed now. And it leads to a lot of issues once you get into that state. So that's kind of a separate topic. Now you've got the health issue here. And the health concerns, like we all know about excessive drinking and like the liver and things like that. But now if you start tying this to cancer, and it has more of a connotation to how like cigarettes do with cancer, right? And we know what happens there. Maybe more and more people will choose to kind of steer away from it. And it's interesting because do you remember, I mean, Trey, you're a younger guy than I am, but I remember when cigarette smoking was such a common thing. And every restaurant filled with smoke, and society just turned around on a dime and saying, well, we don't want that anymore. The smoke is starting to annoy me. I don't want it in my restaurant. And so mostly for business reasons, people are like, yeah, this is a no smoking restaurant. Stop it. And then smokers were like sort of banished to these outside areas of shame where you had to smoke your cigarette in a designated area. And it's kind of, I mean, people still smoke, but it's not as pervasive as before. All that to say, you wonder if things like this will start to lead to maybe the same thing with drinking, but I don't know, because drinking doesn't really necessarily have that same immediate, like the smell, right, of smoke is just so in your face versus someone who's drinking and minding their own business. It's not going to really necessarily bother you. So a lot of thoughts floating around there, but what is your reaction to this thing?
Yeah, I'm 32, so I do remember the time when you would go in as a family to sit down at a restaurant.
Yeah.
You'd have to say like table for 5, no smoking. Was kind of the line
and
that
people
we
like
used to,
3 feet around the corner are smoking, and it's just wafting over. But anyway,
yeah, yes, right. They're right across the hall from me, but hopefully their smell won't get into their
Right.
smoke won't get into my Caesar salad or my cheeseburger. Which, yeah, tough luck, because that's not gonna happen. But yep. I think it is interesting to notice the cultural shift. And, what does an advisory from the Surgeon General mean? Well, actually, he's calling for that black label that we now put on cigarette boxes that say that the Surgeon General's warning, this is linked in data to increased likelihood of developing lung cancer. He's actually asking for producers and lawmakers to pass a law, and then producers of alcohol to start putting a similar black label on alcohol bottles, containers for a 6-pack, whatever it is, that says essentially the same thing, right? That the Surgeon General's warning that data has linked consuming this beverage to several kinds of cancer. So it'll be interesting to see. I don't know, though. I think, like you said, it is much different from smoking, and that there's not the immediate like disgust that you get with the smell of cigarette smoke, and it's
Right.
not as off-putting, right? If you see somebody drinking a beer, that's not really off-putting. But I think in our culture now, it's become kind of stigmatized. When you see somebody smoking, you're like, wow, you really are unhealthy. But whether whether that's a fair description of that person or not, that's just what we do as a culture now. But I don't think that same thing would happen with alcohol.
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, at least not in the short term, but you think of the long term. I'm just real quick, like thinking about cigarettes, like doctors and nurses used to smoke in
right. Yeah.
hospitals and in doctors' offices and things like that. Now that was before my time, but my mother-in-law was a nurse, and she used to be a smoker, and they'd smoke at work, the nurses. So you think about the shift in a half century from that. And I do think our society is becoming more health conscious. Now, does that mean they're going to stop partying? And I don't think that's going to happen overnight. But, when a cultural trend gets strong, it can move really fast. So, we'll see. We'll see what happens with culture here. And, it's going to be a while, like we said, before anything like that really happens. But very interesting to see this information on alcohol coming out. And so appreciate you bringing that one to the podcast today, Trey. And we are going to move now over to the main thing. And Britain's push for assisted dying is, kind of opening for them, at least, a Pandora's box of ethical dilemmas and abuses. obviously as Christians, we know this is a horrible thing that it's even being talked about and being done. But Dale Hurd has more on the controversial bill that's going through in the UK and its potential implications. That's today's main thing.
The terminally ill end-of-life bill would allow mentally competent adults with 6 months or less to live the right to end their lives with medical help. After the House of Commons voted to advance it to parliamentary committee, a fresh debate ignited here over doctor-assisted suicide, which is currently illegal. Supporters of the bill say it will be subject to strict guidelines. Opponents warn it could be used to pressure the vulnerable, including people with disabilities, into ending their lives. And a right to die could become a duty to die. Backers point to those who suffer unbearable pain or irreversible decline and wish to end their lives with dignity. Parliament member Kim Leadbeater, who introduced the legislation, says accusations it would open the door to abuse are wrong.
The title of the bill is terminally ill adults. It is not disabled people, it is not elderly people, as someone else referenced. The criteria are very, very clear.
Opponents, however, counter that legalized assisted suicide has led to abuse everywhere it's been introduced.
No safeguards on this will ever hold. And it will be almost immediately expanded, as we've seen in Canada and other jurisdictions across the world.
Andrea Williams of Christian Concern also rejects the claim that it is compassionate to help those suffering to end their lives.
It is not kind, it is not caring, it is not compassionate to kill. It is kind and compassionate to care. It is kind and compassionate to provide people with the best pain relief, mental, physical, spiritual help that we can.
Becky Bruno has been battling cancer for 10 years and says she's glad there was no assisted dying law when she suffered from great pain.
At one point, I even said to my husband, just let me die. But that didn't mean let me die, give me an injection so that I die. I was in so much pain that that's how I felt. However, I'm sitting here 2 years later. But if that bill was, say, 2 years ago, and my husband wasn't around, I wouldn't be here today.
Around the world, at least 17 nations allow legal assisted suicide under certain conditions. In the U.S., 10 states and the District of Columbia have some form of assisted suicide, either through legislation or a court ruling. And there have been abuses. In Belgium, Tom Mortier's mother was euthanized in 2012 without the family's knowledge, only because she was said to be incurably depressed.
My mother, who was physically healthy because of her mental problems, received a lethal injection from an oncologist.
Mortier only learned of his mother's death from the hospital the day after she died. Alistair Thompson of the group Care Not Killing, which opposes the bill, warns that British doctors who object to assisted suicide on ethical or religious grounds could lose their jobs.
Potentially they could be struck off. So they could be reported to the General Medical Council and would face disciplinary action.
Thompson told us the new law could even legalize the sarco-suicide pod in Britain. What some call the Tesla of suicide machines was recently used in a suicide in Switzerland. Its inventor claims it allows a person to end their life with just the push of a button.
The legislation is so badly written that it talks about drugs or other substances. So it holds open the door actually for use of the sarcopod, the personalised gas chamber.
While one poll shows 3/4 of the British public supporting the assisted dying bill, its passage is by no means assured. After any amendments in committee, the bill must also navigate the House of Lords. If it does pass, some fear that with Britain's already overburdened public health system, the terminally ill could face new pressure to end their lives. Dale Hurd, CBN News, London.
All right, Dale, thanks for that report there. Man, that is shocking stuff. And honestly, it's sadly, in this day and age, not surprising given the way culture is moving right now, the lack of valuing life. It's a culture of death more than it is a culture of life. So hopefully we can stand up and people can stand up and kind of point out the folly of this. I mean, it's sad that you can portray this stuff as care, quote unquote, and make it seem like the compassionate thing. And it's, of course, anything but. All right, we're going to have time on the pod today for one last thing. We're going to look at Psalm 46, 1 and 2. God is our refuge, our strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea. And just watching these wildfires rage there in California, just couldn't help but think of a psalm, for people to cling to in a time like this.
Yeah, for sure. It's a good reminder that regardless of what we're facing on this earth, it's just, a speck, right? This is just a grain of sand in the scope of eternity, and God is sovereign over all of it.
Amen. All right, good spot to leave it here on the Quick Start podcast for today. Another Friday Junior edition of the podcast is in the books. As always, make sure you're getting on over to cbnnews.com and faithwire.com for more news from a Christian perspective. Lord willing, and that creek don't rise up on us. We'll be back here tomorrow with more. God bless. We'll see you then.